Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. I'd particularly like to welcome those members of the public and press watching the live stream. As with all technology, there is always the possibility of something going wrong with the live stream. If anything should go wrong, I will adjourn the meeting until the issue has been resolved. If we are unable to resolve the issue, it will be necessary to postpone the rest of the meeting. Brings us on to agenda item 1, public question time. Thank you, Tracy. There are no public questions this afternoon. Item 2 is apologies and substitutions. Tracy, please.
We have apologies from Councillor Pettit, and Councillor Bellicott is here as substitute.
Thank you, and welcome, Councillor Bellicott. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member have any interest to declare for any items on the agenda? No, that brings us on to item 4, the minutes, to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of February 2024. Can I have a proposer and seconder to approve the minutes? Thank you, Councillor Horgan. And as the other member who was present, I will second, and I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. Agenda item 5 is Chair's announcements. Tracy, I noticed on the agenda we sort of listed this as Chairman's announcements. After the change to the Constitution, can I ask that we change the committee template to reflect that we've gone gender neutral with our terminology? Thank you. Following on from that, I have one announcement today, and that's a brief update from Mark Hodgson of EY, our external auditors. Mark says that the headlines in terms of timelines for external audit are the 2 consultations from the National Audit Office and from DLUC have ended, and we await further details as a result of the submissions that were made to those consultations. SIPFA consultation has now been published and has a close date of the 28th of March. He goes on to say there is no change to EY's approach at this stage, and EY plans on reporting value for money arrangements work and the 2023-24 audit planning in April and May. And that concludes Mark's update. Brings us on to agenda item 6, Audit Committee Annual Review, and can I ask Ian Smith to introduce this report?
Thank you, Chair. It is considered best practice that Audit Committee prepare an annual report to present it to full council. This is the first such report that details the actions of the committee since May 2023. Committee is asked to recommend to full council to approve the report, but as author, I would also welcome comments from the committee as to what they would like to see in future reports. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. And from the Chair, I'll propose the recommendation to full council to approve the report. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you, Chairman. Very happy to second the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Ellicott. Members, do you have further comments, questions to officers for clarification? And that would include Ian's request for other ideas. Councillor Ellicott.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Ian, very much for the report. Popped a question about the remits of independent lay members. I'm grateful for that answer. Am I reading that right in that I assume the terms of reference for the independent lay member will be the same as for a normal elected member of the committee, the only difference being that they won't have any voting rights?
To the best of my knowledge, that is correct, that they'll be able to engage in all discussions as any other member would do, but as I say, won't have the voting rights.
Thank you, Ian, and also thank you for those watching. We did submit questions in advance, and answers have been tabled, and these are published on the council's website. And we did ask a question reference the appointment of the lay member. And I'm pleased to see that that's progressing, and we hope we will have an appointment annual council on the 23rd of May. Right, members, any further? Councillor Horgan.
Yes, if my memory serves me right, I'd actually like to thank also our chief and internal auditor for their assistance in guiding us through the process of getting it right first time. And it was, I think, a very beneficial experience for me personally, and refreshed my memory as to the areas that we should focus on. And it's always good for the old dog to learn new tricks, or even to have the old tricks refreshed. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horgan. Right, we now move to debates. Do we think, Councillor Bellicott?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so in the way of Ian's sort of requesting any additions or changes for future reports, I think first of all, first thing to say is the report to councils more than sufficient, provides the most relevant assurance to, I think, the issues that members have been asking throughout the year, so that's fine. I do think risks obviously continue to exist, and provided they're managed properly, we can demonstrate a healthy control environment. My point would be that risks that are more serious or that have greater weighting, like A6, A7, the ones that in the report are referenced that subject to changes in the MOA and things like that, might benefit from future inclusion. Not necessarily those specific risks, but a focus on the ones that are weighted more highly. And also the reference made, I think there's a subsection in this report from internal audit, and part of that relates to cybersecurity and the IT health check. I'm not sure specifically what stage that is at, but obviously the work is ongoing, wasn't performed in 2022-23, but in future reports to council as well, it'd be useful because that's obviously something that all members are subjected to on the day-to-day. But overall, Chairman, yeah, I'm very happy to approve this report to full council because all the most relevant assurance areas are included in it.
Thank you. Anything further, Councillor Horgan?
Well, yes, I'd just like to thank our Section 151 officer for the change that is made to make sure that the risk management reports and supporting paperwork is more easily available for everybody. And it's now on our public-facing website so that anybody, not just councillors and members and officers, can see it, but also any member of the public as well. And hopefully that might then encourage the occasional public speaker to come forward to ask a question. Who knows?
Who knows indeed. I think one thing we do need to give consideration to, probably outside this meeting, is a timeline for a further self-assessment process. If we take that outside the meeting, because we'll have to sort out dates, etc. Right, so if there's nothing further on this one, members, are we, well, I'm not getting any dissension, so I take it we are happy to recommend to full council approve the report. Are you asking for one, Councillor Bellicott? Thank you. Right, that brings us on to agenda item 7, which is the internal audit charter and strategy. And can I ask Rachel Ashley-Thorne to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. So the first paper from internal audit today is the internal audit charter and strategy. So this is a document that comes to the audit committee on an annual basis for review and approval, in line with the public sector internal audit standards. So the document essentially sets out how we deliver your internal audit service, the role of internal audit and how we interact with the audit committee, and with management as well, to make sure that we're giving the assurances that are required for the local authority and meeting our general requirements under the standards. So as I say, we review this on an annual basis before bringing it back to you. I haven't actually proposed any changes to the document since the last review. So we did make some amendments in 2023, which changed some of the assurance opinions and definitions. I don't propose any changes this year, but obviously we still need to bring it to you for review and approval. And we will then work to this charter and strategy in the delivery of your internal audit plan for 2024-25, which is also on the agenda today. So I'm happy to take any questions or clarify any of the sections within the document if helpful. But that's brought to the committee today for formal approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Again, from the chair, I will propose the recommendation that we approve the internal audit charter and strategy as set out in 2.1 of the report. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. Members, we did pose one question about the breakdown of the internal audit team, and we've got a what I consider to be a very comprehensive reply. Is everybody happy with the reply we've received? Councillor Ellicott.
Thank you, Chairman. With your permission, I will ask a sort of slightly different question. I very much appreciate the breakdown in there. Is there a particular difference between principal auditors, senior auditors, auditors? This is just my understanding.
So through you, Chair, obviously each of the roles is subject to a separate different job description. But generally how I differentiate it, so the principal auditor level must be fully qualified. So that would usually be either a CCAB qualification such as ACA, ACCA, SIPFA, or full IIA chartered status. And they would usually also have a specialism in a particular area. So they would have a lot of experience in particular. For example, we have one member of the team who specialises in some of the contract side, contract audits. We have others with specialisms in other areas. So that would usually be the principal auditor level. Likewise, the audit manager would also be of that level, but would also be managing and supervising the work of other auditors. So they would have that experience and skill set. Then at the senior auditor level, that would usually be a part qualified auditor with the equivalent level of experience as well. So they're able to work more independently and manage some of the assignments. And then the auditor level is more the entry level where people would have relevant experience and would be actively studying towards a professional qualification and building up that experience base. So as I've said, if we have any audits that are being delivered by an auditor, or in most cases a senior auditor as well, they would be under the supervision of a principal auditor or an audit manager, and everything that comes out from the team is also reviewed by me. So hopefully that gives some assurance and a bit of a picture of what that looks like in terms of the team.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. May I ask an additional question?
Yes.
I was just wondering, so obviously we've not had any specific amendments to this year's charter, which is a good indicator that it's working. Do you remember, I wasn't able to find the amendments that were made for the current charter from the previous year. Do you remember, and if you do, would you mind providing a short summary of what those changes were so we can get a picture of what might be liable to change?
Through you, Chair?
Yep.
Yes, so I'm happy to. So the key change that we made last year was in relation to the entries on Annex A and B, which is pages 34 and 35 of today's pack. So our previous assurance opinion ratings had been of substantial, good, satisfactory, limited, and no. And I felt that satisfactory was a little bit too much. I felt that too much could be read into the word satisfactory. I never felt comfortable with it because I feel that if we give an opinion of satisfactory, that almost sounds like it's acceptable. We don't need any change, when actually there are some areas that need improvement. So one of the main changes was to change that middle range assurance opinion from satisfactory to moderate. We also reviewed all of the assurance opinions just to make them a bit more clear and a bit more risk-based, and talked about controls and risk a little bit more, so clarified those. And then finally, in terms of the organisational impact and the that's at the bottom of page 34, previously that had been of major, moderate or minor. And we just thought it was more in line with your risk management framework to just make it simply high, medium and low, and it means more to people than some of those other versions. So we reviewed those titles, and we also reviewed the definitions for each of those. So that was the main change last year.
Thank you. Very comprehensive answer. Councillor Horgan.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank our Chief Internal Auditor for having a single, consistent red, amber, green rating system, which apparently, so I found out yesterday, not all authorities do. Sometimes they have 3 different ones, and that makes it infinitely more difficult to understand and interpret what we're trying to be told. So thank you for making it simple for me, if nobody else.
And me. Members, anything further, or are we happy to approve? I take it because we're approving this, that's delegated to us from council. We don't need to recommend it to council for approval. Thank you for that confirmation. Thank you, Rachel. In that case, we're approved. Brings us on to agenda item number 8, which is the internal audit plan 2024-25. And again, can I ask Rachel to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair. So in line with the public sector internal audit standards again, and also the internal audit charter and strategy that we've just reviewed, I bring the draft audit plan for the financial year to this audit committee for review and approval before it's adopted for the 1st of April. So that's the purpose of this report today. So Appendix 1 provides a copy of the draft internal audit plan, which essentially sets out our programme of work that we will deliver during the next financial year. And it also provides a bit of an overview as to the planning process that we've followed to reach the draft plan that's put before you today. So the key section is Table 1 on page 43 of the pack today. So this sets out the audit plan, each of the audit assignments that we intend to deliver, the number of days assigned to it, the link to the council's risk register and corporate objectives, and an indication of the timing that we expect to be able to deliver that audit based on discussions with management and an understanding of the risk environment that we're dealing with. So I don't intend to go through the draft plan line by line, but essentially it's arisen through my review of the council's risk register, my discussions with members of the corporate management team to understand their risks and areas for development, areas that are likely to increase in risk over the next 12 months, but also some areas where they may not feature high on the risk register, but they're just some of those standard controls that we need to get that regular review and assurance that they are actually ticking along and working as we would expect. So we've got the usual financial coverage on the first page with some additional work around the medium-term financial strategy, which was added as a new risk on the council's risk register at the last meeting of this committee. We've also have a couple of governance-related reviews, such as decision-making and delegations, and the usual annual coverage and procurement compliance. We've got some specific reviews around clearly a major project that the council has on the agenda around the crematorium, where I do think there's a key role for internal audit to give that ongoing assurance. I've used the terminology embedded assurance in the description, which is essentially the approach that we adopt for key projects, where rather than us coming in towards the end of the project and identifying where risks haven't been dealt with or how things could have been done differently, we're actually engaged right from the outset of the project, and we deliver assurance work on a rolling basis throughout those key stages. So I'd expect in the year ahead to be able to do some work around that initiation stage and just some assurance that everything's being set up, that we have the groundwork in place to deliver a good and successful project. So we've also had some other specific reviews around some key risk areas, such as homelessness, which is one of the areas on the strategic risk register. And we also have an entry on the risk register around about supporting our communities during the cost of living crisis and other risks and safeguarding responsibilities that we have. So one of the reviews that we've included is around supporting vulnerable people. And I think this is around some of those more softer processes that we have as an authority of making sure that those are consistently applied. How are we supporting people with the various needs that they may have within our local community? So as I say, I'm happy to expand on any of those areas if you have any queries as to why that's in the audit plan or what we would be looking to get from that audit. But hopefully we've given some wording on each of those as to the basis for that. Also to mention, there is a table 2 on the next page. I seem to have a number on it, 46 of the papers today. Which is actually a reserve list of items. So I just wanted the committee to see this because it's things that we've discussed that are potential risk areas that haven't quite made the cut onto the audit plan. But these are things that we could potentially consider if we needed to change the audit plan. They're things we could refer back to, or we may consider they need to come up in terms of priority during the year as well. But at the moment they're on the reserve list, so they will not be covered in 24-25. I have on each of those suggested how I think we need to get assurance if we are not looking at them in 24-25. So whether that's through inclusion in one of the other reviews or inclusion in the planning for next year. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, on the development of the plan or the inclusion in the draft plan today. There are 2 recommendations. The first is to approve the internal audit plan for 24-25. The second is to approve a delegation to the Finance Director in consultation with the Chair of this committee to approve amendments to the internal audit plan. As I'm conscious of the time lag between meetings, if there was to be an emerging risk where actually we need to respond to a change in the risk environment, it would prevent us from doing that if we were not able to amend the audit plan in that interim period. So that's a standard recommendation that we include every year to enable us to respond to any changes. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Rachel has clearly identified the recommendations as set out in the report. Can I have a proposer and seconder for the recommendations, please?
Happy to propose, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horgan.
Thank you. I'll second that proposal, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bellicott. Right, members, we did pose one question regarding getting some idea of what counter fraud work involves in practice. Is everybody comfortable with the reply we've had? And Councillor Bellicott.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that training has obviously been undertaken for officers as well on counter fraud. I couldn't find any reference to it in a member training plan. Is that something we're looking at?
Rachel?
I'm happy to comment on that, Chair. Obviously, I can't comment because I don't know their members' training plan, but what I would suggest is it's one of the things that came up in our discussions as part of the Audit Committee self-assessment, that we need to look at areas for training. And one of the suggestions was we could have training as a pre-meeting session before an audit committee. And one of the areas I had suggested that we could include in that training package would be something around counter fraud, because I think it's useful to include that for members, particularly of the Audit Committee. So I'm happy to facilitate that training. As to whether or not anything's been planned or taken place, I'm not able to comment on that.
We'll check that after the meeting. Members, any further comments or questions? Councillor Horgan first.
One question and one request, if I may. The 210 days that's proposed, is that more or less or the same as last year? And the second request is, whilst all of these areas are important, one of the ones that I personally would like to understand more about, should anything not go exactly to plan, and I think you can guess that what I'm referring to, that's the crematorium. We want to make sure that that's a complete success. So obviously the audit committee meets periodically, but equally that may not, as I think you alluded to earlier, align with when something happens. So I'd like to sort of request that we get informed, and secondly, just check who actually you would go to in what sort of order, in terms of sort of going, hello, I'd like to, bring this to people's attention. Is that okay?
And before I ask Rachel to comment on that, she'll cover the 210 days. I happen to know it's the same. But bear in mind, we always have the ability to call an extra meeting should something be flagged. And I would certainly intend doing that if we felt we needed it. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, just to confirm, that is the same number of days that we have delivered for the last, I believe, 5 or 6 years since I've been working with East Cambridgeshire. So yes, I can confirm that's the case. In terms of your second request, yes, I think we have already had a conversation along these lines, haven't we, around how we would share any findings between meetings. And I'm more than happy to look at that further, depending on when we look to conclude each of those audit reviews, and if there's anything particularly that I felt I needed to flag to the committee's attention as well.
Yeah, sorry, Ian, do you want to follow on?
Not so much on a timely basis, but clearly the risk register, which you receive every 6 months, the crematorium will appear on that moving forward as well.
Councillor Bellicott.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple further questions, drilling down a little bit into the detail. The first of the one, I prompted a question about risks A6 and A7, and response indicates that the rolling risk review process identifies certain priority risks. That may be in a previous document that I've overlooked, but do you have to hand those current priority risks?
Rachel.
Through you, Chair. So we've actually had this conversation earlier today. And what we propose to do is, rather than ask members at this meeting to propose priorities for the next year, I'm just mindful you don't actually have the risk register in front of you on the agenda today. So what we were going to do is ask the members for the committee at the next meeting for the priorities for 24-25 for the rolling risk review coverage when you have the register in front of you. What we will do in the meantime is look at risks that we will identify that we think are priorities for coverage, which will then be reported at that first meeting, and then ask for the priorities for the rest of the year. When we last consulted the audit committee for the areas for focus for last year, the request was to look at the risks around the trading company, which we did do and were reported during the year.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. There's two areas of the plan itself that I wanted to ask you about. The first is the revenues and benefits partnership. I'm a little bit lost, this may just be me again, about how far this overlaps with the Anglia Revenue Partnership. So in terms of the controls the council has in relation to council tax benefits overpayments, national non-domestic rates, does that include looking at fraud from our side, and does it include enforcement, or is that on the side of the Anglia Revenue Partnership?
Through you, Chair. So this actually it does include enforcement, and it is all entirely within Anglia Revenue Partnership. So none of this was within the council. So we do have to contract this work out, and it's delivered as part of the partnership arrangement.
Thank you. And one further, it's in the table 2, the business continuity management. I suppose a two-part question. What is business continuity management in your estimation for the purposes of this list? And secondly, does it include the governance of the trading companies as well?
Rachel.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So for business continuity management, it's a pretty standard audit that we do on a regular basis, where we'd be looking at the coverage of the council's business continuity plan, both at a corporate plan level and then at service levels, usually would underpin that. We want to focus on how services have been prioritised. So if we were to have a major incident, whether that's a loss of power, loss of buildings, extreme weather, loss of staff, which would be those priority services to keep running? Which ones could we not have running, for example, for 24 hours? Before there would be an issue, whereas we may have some services that actually could go a month before it would give a genuine risk to the community of that not being up and running. So there should be some process for prioritising our services to focus recovery action in the case of an incident. We'd also like to see how that's linked with the council's IT services and as well in terms of disaster recovery planning. So we usually look at linkages there. So these are all things that we generally look at as part of that audit. What I've proposed here is, because we haven't been able to squeeze it onto the plan this year, it's actually, as we just mentioned, the rolling risk reviews, it's actually one of the strategic risks on the rolling risk register. So whilst those reviews are not audits, it would give some assurance that the areas that are suggested on the plan, on the risk register as controls, actually exist. So it would give us some comfort in the meantime, and hopefully then we will be able to include it as a full audit in 25-26. Or if we feel that actually there's a real issue, for example, when we look at the rolling risk register entry and there's a major gap, we might want to reprioritise and get a full audit onto the audit plan before then. So I think it just gives us a bit of a temperature check in the absence of an audit.
Thank you, Rachel. Members, it's now moved to debate. Is there anything further we need to debate on this? We have take the two recommendations separately then. Firstly, can we approve the internal audit plan for 2024-25? Yep. Thank you. And then can you approve delegation to the finance director in consultation with myself to approve amendments if required in the interim? Thank you. Right. That brings us on to agenda item number 9. Actually, just an aside on business continuity, have you had a word with Sainsbury's to see if you can help them?
They need it.
Sorry, right, agenda item number 9, internal audit progress report. Over to you again, please, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So the last report from me today is the latest update on the delivery of the current year's internal audit plan. So we have 100% of your audit plan is now either complete or in progress, and a further 2 reports have been finalised since I produced these papers for this committee meeting. So we only actually have 2 audits that are currently not yet finalised, which means that we do remain on track for delivery. We've already met our 90% target for this year.
Excellent.
So just talking briefly through the report that's provided as usual at Appendix 1. We have a number of audit reports. We have 4 audit reports this time that have been finalised since the last meeting. So I'll just take members briefly through each of those. So the first relates to debtors or our accounts receivable system. Overall, we've given a moderate level of assurance over the control environment, a good level of assurance on compliance, and a low organisational impact. The reason for those assurance opinions, the moderate reflects that generally there was a good level of control, a good system in place. It's been well established to recover income for sundry debts and ensure debt recovery. The reason that it's been reduced to a moderate is because when we conducted some of the sample testing, we identified some gaps in record keeping around recovery action that had been taken, and the visibility around that and the status of each of those debts. So what we've recommended is some strengthening of controls around in that area, which is hence the moderate assurance opinion this time. But as I say, in terms of the controls that are in place and are operating, those are operating well, and we've given a good level of assurance. This includes around the recovery and the raising of invoices, the accuracy of those and approvals, and making sure that those processes are working effectively. So overall, that's a brief overview on that system. As I say, the recommendations have been agreed to strengthen the record keeping in that area. The second is another financial systems review, which relates to treasury management. So here we're looking at the council's systems for investments and if they had any borrowing as well. So we've looked at around the treasury management strategy, the use of low risk counterparties and advisors to inform our decision making in terms of treasury management, the monitoring of cash flows and opportunities to invest money, the appropriate use of segregation of duties to ensure that we're managing those controls appropriately, and the regular review of treasury management activity. So in all of those areas, we were satisfied with the design of the controls and with the compliance in practice, with no significant findings to report. So that's enabled us to give a good level of assurance on the control environment and substantial assurance on the compliance with only a low organisational impact again. The next was in relation to budgetary control. So again, another regular financial audit that we conduct, and we do tend to vary the focus of the reviews from one year to the next. So some years we'll look at budget setting, other years we'll look more at budget monitoring. So in this particular case, we were looking around the setting of the budget, which we've given some assurance around how that was uploaded onto the system for accuracy. But we've also then focused on the budget monitoring and reporting arrangements to ensure that any significant variances are being drawn out in papers, and then we're getting assurance around the basis for those and the impact of those on the forecast outturn. So apart from some minor administrative errors and some potential issues around variances that had not been included in the definition as per the financial regulations, we were satisfied that everything was operating well. So we've given a good level of assurance both for the control environment and the compliance with the controls in practice, and a low organisational impact. The next was one of our risk-based audits, which was looking at community infrastructure levy income. So this is where we are recovering charges from developers in relation to the SIL. So in overall terms, we've given a moderate level of assurance for the control environment and the compliance. This recognises that whilst the processes seem to have been well established and there was use of appropriate systems to manage the data, we did have some concerns around the lack of formalisation of some of those processes. So what we would really want to see is those documented in some procedure notes to make sure that we're clear on how they operate in practice and to make sure they're consistently applied going forward as well. So in terms of compliance, we identified some inconsistencies, particularly in the timely issuing of demand notices, applying late payment surcharges and interest on a consistent basis, and being prompt and consistent in our recovery action where payments remained overdue. So we have made a number of recommendations in this area, which the majority of which were implemented with immediate effect. And we will continue to monitor the implementation of the remaining actions. The other area that we identified was around ensuring that where we have collected the money, we are only using it in line with the approved infrastructure list or subject to the right level of approval. And we were able to give assurance that the sample of projects that we looked at from the last return had all been suitably approved. We just identified one error, which was due to be rectified within the accounts. So those reports and all of the other audits that we've completed during the year are reflected in table 1 from page 55 of the papers. And each of the audits for the year is included with the status as at the time of producing this report and the outcomes if finalised. Finally, just to mention in terms of the implementation of audit recommendations, so on table 2 in page 59, we show that there were 6 actions implemented since the last audit committee report, and there were 4 actions which were overdue. I can actually report, and as it was included in the question responses today, 2 of the 2 low priority recommendations have both now been closed. So that leaves us with the 2 medium priority recommendations. And we've given you full details of those in table 3 on page 60 of the papers with the latest update. And I believe there was a further update in the responses to the questions as well on the information governance action. Lastly, on page 61, there's the latest feedback on the internal audit service from customers on their experience of the audit as well. So in general, we're on track for delivery against the plan and in terms of our general performance indicators as well. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, or expand on any of that further. But that's the latest update. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Yet another very comprehensive report and introduction. And from the Chair, I will propose the recommendation that we note progress made by internal audit in delivery of the audit plan and key findings. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'll second that proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Bellicott. Right, members, we did pose quite a number of questions on the internal audit progress report. We've got the answers in front of us. Firstly, are we satisfied with those answers, or are there areas we wish to expand on? Councillor Horgan first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I trust our Chief Internal Auditor has also seen the Q&A supplied here, and I won't use the word "did you find them satisfactory," because apparently that could be interpreted. I would just merely ask if you would concur with the answers that that they are a fair reflection of the situation as far as you're aware.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't have any issues with any inaccuracies in the responses.
Thank you. Councillor Bellicott.
Thank you, Chairman. Rachel, in relation to SIL, obviously a couple of minor issues have been identified with that. In the response to the question we've talked about, there has been formalisation of oversight of monies outstanding and actions taken and sanctions applied. Does that mean, maybe more a question for Ian as well, do we have a document sharing SIL sanctions that are applicable?
I don't honestly know the answer to that, but clearly I can take it away and get an answer for you.
Thank you, Ian. The second one is the next question down on the sheet about information governance. Obviously, this is one of the sort of more medium recommendations in relation to adding a field, a DPIA mandatory field to the council's reports. I noticed this isn't scheduled to come for consideration by the corporate management team until May. Is it your opinion that that is sufficient? Do we have assurance that that will sort of materialise at some point?
Through you, Chair. So obviously I can comment. Obviously we make the recommendation to management. So in this case, we're given a medium priority. So we don't set an expected timeframe of when that should be implemented by. So it's for officers to set that date of implementation, which was originally December. We will obviously continue to monitor that to make sure that it is completed in May. But I don't know if management wanted to comment further as to the reason for that delay.
Before I ask management to comment further, just from the Chair, well, because of a conversation I had with Tracy, because council made some significant changes to the constitution which affect the committee templates, it's, to my mind, it's sensible to get those template, all those changes that require changes to the committee template done at one time rather than piecemeal. So I have to say from the Chair, I'm comfortable if it's May, as long as we do get it done in May. I don't know
if you'd like me to come on that, Chairman. Yes, the reason that it has been delayed is I have had approaches from a number of other areas, namely HR and also as far as Climate Change Environment Act. So basically, they're also asking for what I call the implications section of the report template. They're wanting modifications for those areas as well. And if we don't do them together, it will get quite messy. So I want to do a redesign where we can incorporate all those implications, probably in a tick box way, with then underneath you can then elaborate on the different areas. So I know the addition of the information governance aspect of it as well is a third one. So I wanted to put them all together. And unfortunately, because we're now going into, and I mustn't use the word purdah, the pre-election period, because of that, we have fewer management team meetings in April and May. And unfortunately, I'm away for the only other one that's taking place in April, which is why we've had to shunt it to the May one. Otherwise, it would have been at the April CMT meeting. So that gives a bit of background. And also, yes, I think you're quite right, Chairman, we can then incorporate any non-gender issues as far as the template, if there are any. I don't think there are, but just make sure I can have a last scan of that to include that as well.
Thank you. I hadn't quite appreciated that the changes outstanding from the Constitution Review, of course, are all coming down the line as well. So, yeah, that's absolutely fine. No, that's fine. Not at all to chase you, just to obviously make sure that internal audit are satisfied. There's one further question I had, if I may, Chairman. In the last question there, the low priority recommendations, obviously I understand why they're not regularly reported to committee, because this committee is predominantly for risk management. But sort of for my understanding of what the difference is between a low priority recommendation and something that does carry risk, could you let me know what the two that have just been closed were? And also in general terms, what constitutes a low risk that isn't worthy of being reported to committee?
Rachel?
Through your chair. So I would just refer you back to the internal audit charter that was approved today. So Annex B on page 35 of the papers sets out the definitions for each of these. So as you can see here, so low priority is an action recommended to enhance controls or improve operational efficiency. So it doesn't expose a risk by not being implemented. So the highs and the mediums actually require action to manage a risk of some description. So that's how we differentiate between those two. In terms of the actions that were closed, so I can recall one of them off the top of my head was in relation to the documenting or updating of procedures in relation to the budget setting process, I believe it was, which we were happy was actually captured, but there were some areas where we just felt it needed to be clarified further to make sure that it was fully documented. So that's the type of an example of the type of recommendation that would be made as a low priority.
Thank you, Rachel. Members, any further comments or questions? Anything we need to debate on this one? We are asked to note progress. Councillor Bellecourt.
Thank you, Chair. Just one thing for me. Obviously, it seems like a good assurance opinion is present for all the areas there. So I think the response to the questions as well is more than satisfactory. So firstly, thank you very much, Rachel, for your work. I think probably a consideration for members come the next meeting, if we're looking at the rolling risk reviews and priority risks, should be to look at what we want to include in those the days that we've just approved for risk management in terms of internal audit. Certainly specifically looking at the higher weighted risks like A6 and A7 for the waste service, because naturally linking to the discussion from the last item, those are services that can't be interrupted. That's all from me. Thanks, Chair.
And Councillor Bellecourt. Right, members, so we're happy to note progress, etc. Thank you, Rachel. Councillor Bellecourt has just stolen my thunder on agenda item 10, the forward agenda plan, and what we needed to put on for next time round about priority setting. So, Tracy, did you get a note of that?
Risk priority setting.
Yeah. Is there anything else we need to consider on the forward agenda plan? If not, see you all in July. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody. What's the giggling?